Welcome to our Q&A with Jianyi of Freshpals Farms in Olds, Alberta. For those of you that have never attended one of our events, Rural Roots to Climate Solutions is an Alberta-based nonprofit out of the Stettler Learning Center. And we host workshops, field days, and webinars across the entire province, empowering rural Albertans with climate solutions. So we work primarily with producers and with farmers, but also just rural Albertans in general, to create a space to host discussions around climate solutions. And we're strong advocates that climate solutions can also be farm solutions. So I think I'm ready to start with the questions. Are you ready, Jianyi?
Yes. Thank you, Marie.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with a warm-up question? So before we get going, Jianyi, where are you located in Alberta and what do you primarily grow in your greenhouse?
So I'm located in, I think it's central Alberta. Our town is called Olds. I'm pretty close to Olds. It's 1 hour north of Calgary. So right now I'm operating one commercial size passive solar greenhouse. I grow mainly tomatoes in the greenhouse. And I have tried a couple of varieties, the beefsteak tomatoes and cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers. But this year I'm gonna use the whole greenhouse for beefsteak tomatoes only. So that's probably what a professional grower would do. Maybe just one variety in the whole greenhouse. So I can right now these days I'm transplanting all the seedlings. I can start to pick tomatoes in May and all the way until end of October, and then I switch them to leafy veggies.
Okay.
That's what I do in the whole year.
Yeah.
And I'm also building the second passive solar greenhouse. I will grow more varieties in the second one.
Yeah. So you're busy.
Yeah, it's really busy. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you our first question. So your greenhouse uses just passive solar energy that's captured from the sun to heat the greenhouse itself. Have you explored geothermal energy or other heating methods for your greenhouse?
Okay. The answer is no. I know a lot of people are very interested in this geothermal idea. It's a good technology, but for my greenhouse, it's pretty big. Uh, the area is 10,000 square feet, 1,000 square meters. It's a pretty big greenhouse. If I, dig 5 feet deep and bury pipes, it's pretty much cost for me. So that's one concern. Uh, More importantly, the second concern is the water table. Because we have to dig, um, in springtime, when the snow melts, there's a lot of water in my farm, and the water table is pretty high, and it may give me trouble. Yeah. So I think if we really want to play with the geothermal, we have a way with this kind of greenhouse. We can play it with the inside the clay wall. So my back wall is made of clay. So if we bury the pipes into the clay, we don't have a water table problem, and we don't have to dig. So the cost will be very low.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the future, depends on my budget. If the budget is enough, I'd like to try this idea. I believe it can give me a couple of degrees higher in winter.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. What about LED lights? Do you use those at all in your greenhouse?
And I'm not using the LED because they're very expensive. For such a greenhouse, it's like thousands of LED lights you need to use. And those lights are very expensive, and the utility bills will be very high. So I don't really depend on the winter crops. So my main revenue comes from the tomatoes in summer and fall. So I like to keep it as natural as possible. I don't give it artificial heating or lighting.
Okay. So question number 2.
Yeah.
There are a lot of greenhouse designs out there that recommend using water as a thermal mass to keep the temperatures higher overnight. Could you use water as a thermal mass instead of your clay wall? And why did you choose clay for your wall?
Yeah, water is a good material. Water is free. It holds a lot of heat. It holds more heat than clay. That's a very good idea. But the problem is you need barrels. You need maybe thousands of barrels because my wall is 100 meters long
Mhm.
and 4 meters tall, and we need a couple of hundred barrels. That's also cost,
Yeah.
a lot of cost, and you cannot stack them too high. Otherwise, you have it's dangerous, right? You have safety issue, and in the long run, they may leak because the water is a liquid, right? So
Mhm.
that's why I choose clay. Clay, first of all, is free. Yeah, we have clay anywhere. So I take my clay from my dugout,
Mhm.
and I can because I use the tubings and the metal sheetings to hold the clay, so I can build a 4 meter tall wall. It's pretty tall, and the clay, because it's thick, it's 1 meter thick, it's also uh, insulation.
Mhm.
It's a good insulator, and the clay is pretty stable, and it's pretty heavy, so it stabilizes the whole greenhouse. No matter how strong the wind is, especially the north wind, it's very strong here. It doesn't do any damage to my greenhouse. So
Oh,
there's a lot of benefits using clay. Yeah, but of course, clay is not the best material in terms of holding heat. If we can use dry sand and gravel, sand and gravel, is probably better material, but it's not free.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. So there's a bit of a cost consideration there.
right.
Mhm. All right. So this is question number 3 now.
Yeah,
You're currently in the process of building your second passive solar greenhouse on your property.
yeah,
What will you do differently when you build this new greenhouse?
right. So first of all, my insulated blankets is not the best one. Unfortunately, the manufacturer did a little trick for me. Yeah, it's very unfortunate, but it's true. I paid for the best material, a lot of very expensive material, but I get not the best one. So these insulated blankets is pretty heavy, but it's not thick enough. The latest generation would be very thick and light, very warm. So for well, the second greenhouse, I already bought all the material, including the insulated blankets. But in the future, if I build the third one, the fourth one, I would definitely use better insulated blankets that will give me at least 2 degrees higher in in the coldest days.
Mhm.
Yeah, when it's warmer, then in the warmer days, the performance will be much better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing, and the other idea is the geothermal with the back wall, because uh, we have 2 layers of polyfilms. So between these 2 layers, because it's very tall, between these 2 layers, a lot of heat is trapped in there. Uh, so at about 2 meters tall, the temperature, let's say, it reaches about 20 degrees,
Mhm.
but up on the top is 40 degrees. So
Mhm.
if we can extract that heat and use it for warming the wall, the back wall,
Oh,
is a really good idea.
yeah.
Yeah, but depends on my budget. I might try that idea in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So fourth question. This is a question, okay, that I think has come up at every single event that I have hosted with you, Gianni. It's a very popular question.
Mm.
Could you also keep chickens in your passive solar greenhouse? And would they act as a significant heat source to help heat your greenhouse?
Yeah, I try to keep the chickens in my greenhouse, but not because I want the heat from them. It's because I don't have a good chicken coop in the winter. So I use the greenhouse as a shelter for the chickens. I put 100 chickens in the greenhouse, but the heat generated from them is not significant. I cannot feel the heat at all.
Yeah,
So it's just because this greenhouse is too big. 100 chickens is like nothing compared to the size of the greenhouse,
yeah,
and they make a lot of dust,
yeah,
make dusty. So I don't suggest the people to keep chickens in the greenhouse. And first of all, because it's not really effective heating, and they make a mess, and they bring bacteria to the greenhouse.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
That consideration for sure. I can
right.
attest to how messy chickens are. They are
Yeah,
very, very messy.
yeah. I had to clean the wall and the poly,
Yeah.
and they caused a lot of headache to me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, that's good to know. Good to know.
yeah.
Okay, so question 5. The passive solar greenhouse design, it definitely goes beyond just extending your season, your growing season. Um, so can you grow fruit trees inside the greenhouse that wouldn't typically do well in your growing zone?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people are interested in growing fruit trees in the greenhouse. I'm not growing because I'm like a professional uh, vegetable grower. So I grow tomatoes because I need this is a business, right? I'm making a profit out of it. But if you like to grow fruit trees, these greenhouses are perfect for the fruit trees. So let me tell you what people are doing in China with such greenhouses. And because there are so many millions of such passive solar greenhouses in China, and they already have too much vegetables, so they are trying to grow fruit trees in these greenhouses. And the most popular fruit tree is the cherry trees, the big cherries, and they can pick cherries in January or February.
Wow.
So this is how they, yeah. If I don't tell you the story, you may not believe it.
Yeah.
But this is how they play with it. In late August or September, they put a AC system in the greenhouse and to cool down the whole greenhouse because the greenhouse is insulated very well. They roll down the insulated blankets, so it's like a freezer in a cooler in the whole greenhouse. So they bring the temperature down to about 5 degrees Celsius, and that way they put the cherry trees into hibernation.
Okay.
And after a month and a half, about 40 days, 50 days, and then roll up the insulated blankets and let the sun warm the greenhouse again. And that way they break the hibernation and the trees start to sprout and whatever, right? And that way they can start to pick cherries in the spring festival.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh, that's so
and the price is like crazy.
Mhm.
At least $20 a pound
Yeah.
cherries, and some retail price are like $80 a pound.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
possible.
So yeah, but and some other people they play with dragon fruit. For dragon fruit, you don't cool them, but you maybe they give them a little heat. They can also pick dragon fruit in the winter time, in January or February,
Yeah.
and they are extremely sweet, extremely popular.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah. So with this kind of a greenhouse, you can get really creative and
Mm.
play with your ideas.
Yeah. play,
Yeah.
yeah, play with your seasons almost a little bit in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so question something that surprises a lot of people about your greenhouse is that it doesn't have any fans. So
Yeah.
how do you vent your greenhouse and how do you control the humidity without fans?
Yeah. So I open up the top window and I can roll up the polyfilms on the bottom. And
Okay.
because it's open on the top and the bottom, so it creates a natural airflow from the bottom to the top.
Mhm,
Yeah, because in the summertime when it's very hot, the hot air will go up, right?
mhm,
Uh, yeah, usually that's enough for most of the season. But in summertime when it's really hot, I pull up a shading cloth to cool down the temperature a little bit. And so the from spring, summer, and early fall, I don't have a humidity problem at all
mhm,
because it's pretty dry in the greenhouse and we have a very good sunlight. But in wintertime, the humidity start to
mhm.
increase to a very high level, and then I start to have disease. And so my solution is put an end to the tomatoes at the end of October, even though I can keep them all the way until January if I like. For a professional grower, you don't like to do that because in November and December is too wet, so they get disease.
Mhm.
And so my solution is to pull them out and replace them with leafy veggies. The leafy veggies are pretty small, so they don't evaporate too much water into the air. So it's a dry in the greenhouse, and there will be no problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
So question 7. Because you don't use fans, does the passive solar greenhouse get too hot in the summer?
At O's, this at our location, we only have about 2 weeks hot days
Mhm.
when it's about 30 degrees Celsius. Except that's 2 weeks, and mostly it's cool. It's pretty cool. So, like I said just now, I can pull up a sheeting cloth
Mhm.
and I open all the windows. Usually that's just enough. But maybe for 2 weeks and it's extremely hot, so I missed. I
Oh,
have the overhead misting system, so I missed just for 2 or 3 times a day for
mhm.
2 weeks. That's enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so question 8. Your greenhouse design uses a double wall with polyfilm. What thickness of polyfilm do you use?
Usually for most of the growers, they use 6 mil. My again, the manufacturer did a little trick. They tried to cut the cost, so they gave me 4.8 mil.
Mhm,
4.8 mil. I think it works. It's not too bad. Last year there was 5 times pretty bad hail, and it didn't do damage on the poly. But of course, in the future, when I change the poly, I'd like to use a 6 mil.
mhm.
Yeah, so 6 mil will last longer and problem free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how thick is your insulated blanket? And what's the R value on the insulation blanket?
Okay, the insulated blanket is like 1 inch thick.
Mhm,
Uh, the latest generation insulated blankets will be like 2 inch thick. When it's not under any stress, it's
mhm.
2 inch. But when you compress it, it's like 1 inch or less than 1 inch. So they're very light, very warm. And because the insulated blanket is made of polyester fabric,
Mhm,
so my insulated blanket is like R3, and
mhm.
the latest generation insulated blankets will be like R5, R6.
Oh, okay. Okay. So question 9, where did you source your material and equipment to build your greenhouse?
Yeah, I sourced everything from China, but as a kit.
Yeah.
So yeah, every material and parts, including the insulated blankets and the polys and the trusses, they
Mhm.
come together as a kit. in a shipping container. Yeah, and yeah.
And then
And
how much did it cost for everything for your greenhouse, for all of that material?
right, it cost me for $100,000 Canadian dollars,
Mhm.
including all the material, the parts, the tax, custom tax, and GST, and the shipping cost
Mhm.
to my farm.
Okay. And so
Yeah,
that was $100,000 Canadian. And can you just remind us the size of your greenhouse so we can put that into context?
right. So the length is 100 meters, about 330 feet,
Mhm.
and the width is 10.5 meters.
Okay.
Yeah, and the highest point is 6 meters tall.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um, did you assemble your greenhouse yourself or did you have help?
I did it with my wife. So
Yeah.
I weld everything with the help of my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took us about a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I had, I don't have fancy machines and equipments, so I built some tools by myself. Yeah, but I did it. It's not easy, but I did it.
Yeah, that's great. That's like putting together an IKEA bookshelf times 1,000. That's really great.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so question 10, last question. How long did it take you to make that investment back?
Okay. We can make a calculation. So for me, I grow tomatoes and beefsteak tomatoes in the greenhouse. Last year, I grew like 2,000 plants because last year was there was different varieties, beefsteak, cherry, and cucumbers, beans, peppers. But this year will be beefsteak only. So this year I reduced the number of plants to 1,800.
Mhm.
And according to last year's data, one plant can give you about 20 pounds. And but remember, this is soil grown. If you use hydroponic, you give them artificial heating, lighting, and
Mhm.
carbon dioxide, then they grow like crazy and they give you 3 times more tomatoes. So one plant maybe 60 pounds,
Yeah.
maybe even more. For me, it's 20 pounds, uh, and times 1,800, that would be 36,000 pounds.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then times your price. I do retail, and I sell at 350 per pound.
Yeah.
You know, as a start at the beginning because I'm a new farmer. People they don't really know me, right? So I
Yeah.
don't sell like a really high price. But you should be able to get $5 per pound at a
Mhm.
farmer's market.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 36,000 times 33.5 or
Yeah.
$5 a pound. Yeah, that's what we get as a revenue. And because right now I do it myself, uh, I don't I don't need to pay for the labor, right? So the profit is like 80,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah,
Yeah.
so for a professional grower, you should be able to make the investment back in about 2 years.
In about 2 years.
Yeah, in about 2 years.
That's a pretty good return on your
Yeah,
investment. Yeah.
yeah, and the lifespan of this kind of greenhouse, because it's old steel, the lifespan should be longer than 30 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a good investment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really good to know. Gianni, that's the end of our top 10 questions, but I'm going to give
Yeah.
everybody that's online with us today a chance to ask questions as well, because I'm sure stuff has come up. There's a
Yeah.
few questions that have come up in the chat box, so really quickly, I'm going to
Yeah.
just have a look there and see
Yeah.
what's in the chat box, and I'll ask you those questions. If anybody has a question for Gianni, feel free to just unmute yourself on your microphone there, and speak up, and we'll get Gianni to answer your question directly. So here's a question in the chat box, Gianni. How do
Yeah.
pollinators get into your greenhouse to help with pollination?
Yeah. The pollinators do not get into my greenhouse because I have a screen outside my greenhouse to block all the pests. But so last year we tried to use the handheld vibrator to pollinate, but later we found it's not really necessary because we work with the plants every day. We prune the leaves, the suckers, and we train them to the trellis, and we lower them because they grow taller and taller. They eventually they will grow taller than 5 meters. So we have to lower them, and we pick the tomatoes. All that work we do, we shake the plants,
Yeah.
and that's enough for the pollination. Because my greenhouse is always pretty dry. So yeah, when it's pretty dry, you shake it a little bit and it's pollinated.
Okay. So
Yeah,
you're finding that just the normal everyday work that you're doing in and around the plants is enough to pollinate them.
right. Yeah.
So here's another question in the chat box. Is it possible to purchase the plans of your greenhouse, either from you or directly from the manufacturer?
Yeah, sure. I think we can we can exchange our emails, and yeah, I can send people the plans or whatever the help I can do. But so from the last supplier, I had the issues with the quality, the insulated blankets. So I found a better supplier, and I'm working with them to upgrade the design.
Mhm.
And so, but it takes about a month or two.
Yeah.
After we finish that, I can provide people with more information.
Okay. For sure. So after the our presentation today, I will share your email with everybody that's on the call today, so that they
Yeah,
have questions they can ask you, and you can share plans and design and
yeah,
that.
sounds
Great.
good.
Thank you for that, Jianyi.
Sounds good.
So what would be the minimum size that you could build a passive solar greenhouse? Like, would it be cost effective to build just 100-meter square greenhouse?
It's not, I wouldn't say it's cost effective, but it's pretty efficient if we build it large enough.
Mm-hmm.
The maximum length I would suggest is 80 meters because for my 1000 meters it works, but I get into trouble from time to time with the rolling systems because there are so many rolling systems. We roll the insulated blankets and we roll the polyfilm outside and the inside. 100 meters is a little bit too long for those motors and the rods, and it's too heavy. But 80 meters, we won't have any problem. And because it's long enough, so we can grow uh, so many plants in the greenhouse at the same time, and it's easy to manage them. I would say the minimum length is better to be maybe 100 feet, 30 meters. If you go shorter than that, because the greenhouse is pretty tall, it's 6 meters tall or like 20 feet tall. Uh, if it's very short, it may be not really stable in front of the big wind. Yeah.
Okay. So here's another question about supplying the materials for the greenhouse. So um, in order to reduce the overall cost that happens with shipping and import fees, is there a local supplier here in Canada that could provide people with these passive solar greenhouse kits like the one that you have?
Right now there is no, unfortunately. Um, I think I'm probably the first one building such a greenhouse, but I hope because so many people are very interested, and we can whoever can start a business to make such a greenhouse and be a supplier here in the future, right? But not now. Yeah.
Yeah, we've definitely received so much interest in passive solar greenhouse design since our first webinar with you. So I think it's a really great opportunity. But right now, there's not someone in Canada that's currently doing this. If anybody has a question, don't be shy. You can also you can ask Jianyi directly, just unmute yourself. But I'll keep going through the chat box to make sure I don't miss anything.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this webinar. Very interesting. Thank you for your great work. My name is Jean-Philippe. I own a farm in Quebec, in Canada, and I'm really interested by the solar passive greenhouse. And I had two questions for you. What type of foundation do you use for your greenhouse in order to insulate the and to prevent weed from getting in?
Yeah, I don't have a foundation actually. To make a concrete foundation, it costs a lot, right? So we have a base. We just use a steel angle as a base, and we weld anchors on top of the steel angle, and we install the trusses, the steel trusses on top of the anchors, and we bolt them, and that's it. But if you want to insulate the soil, so for example, I dig 4 feet deep, and I put a foam, just 1-inch foam, that's enough. Lower it into the trench. In that, just three sides, east, west, and the south. Because on the back, on the north, there's a thick wall. I don't need to insulate that side. So 3 sides of insulation below the soil is enough. If you don't really want to grow, for example, the fruit vegetables in winter, I think we can skip that insulation because digging into the soil, we have problems because you will contaminate our soil because we bring the clay up and mix it with the soil, and we have a problem, right? So if you don't really, like me, if you don't really depend on the winter crops, we don't need to do the insulation. Yeah, and
Do you,
we use sorry, we use the plastic mulch to cover the edges, the corners, to suppress the weed.
And do you have a trenches around your greenhouse to keep the water out with that you fill with rocks? Or
Yeah, I have one trench in front of the greenhouse because in summertime when it rains pretty bad, because the greenhouse is like 10 meters wide, so there's a lot of water coming from the greenhouse and to the front of the greenhouse. I don't want the water to accumulate there, so I put a trench in the front. But I put the trench about 2 meters away because for this 2 meters, I need a tractor to go in there in the winter time to blow the snow. Yeah, there will be like 2 meter high snow in front of the greenhouse in the winter, so I have to use my tractor to blow the snow.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Jianyi, there's another question here in the chat box I'll ask you. Is there a formula for calculating the cost of the building, like relative to like the overall length of the greenhouse, or because I know your greenhouse was 100 meters, but is the cost, can you divide that cost up based on how long the greenhouse is, or how does that work for pricing?
Yes, so it's like the greenhouse area is 1,000 square meters, and it's 100,000 Canadian dollars. So it's like $100 per square meters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
or $10 per square feet.
And then here's a question. Do you have issues with rodents inside the greenhouse?
Exactly, that's a very good question. Because in winter, especially in winter, outside is very cold and inside the greenhouse is pretty warm. And my neighbors are all like wheat growers. So in their field, there's so many mice. And the warm greenhouse attracts mice in the greenhouse. Yeah, so we need to find a way to control them, right? And I just find it's very difficult to control them. I have to be honest, but I just find a way that I want to try. There's essential oil. I think it's called peppermint. That can repel the mice. Mice doesn't like the that smell, so I'd like to try it. I watched the YouTube. This is probably the only way that may works for a commercial grower. Yeah, because a trap doesn't work. Trap is too small.
Yeah, and you have such a big space, you'd need a lot of traps, I imagine,
Yeah,
to catch all
yeah,
those. I've
yeah,
heard that about peppermint as well.
yeah,
So yeah, it's worth a try. It'll be interesting to see
yeah.
how that works. I've also heard
Oh,
it works well for keeping like flies away from the chicken coop if you plant peppermint around chicken coops. So there,
oh, nice.
there might be something to that idea. Who knows?
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat box said oil of oregano might work as well.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Is there any other questions? Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask Jianyi a question directly? Or if you're feeling shy, you can always use the chat box. But while we have
Sure, I'll ask a question.
perfect.
I'm curious about your water source, and I guess depending on your answer, I may have more questions. But
Water source, yeah. My groundwater is pretty salty and alkaline. So my groundwater, the pH is like 8 to 8.5. So it's full of salt and alkaline. I cannot use well water, sorry. So most of the greenhouse growers around my area, they have a dugout and they use water from the dugout. And we collect spring runoff, which is the water from the melt snow. And I have a pretty big dugout, and in every spring it will be full, and in winter the water level will drop like 1 meter or two. But because my dugout is pretty deep, so I always have a water supply year round.
so it doesn't freeze when you use the dugout?
Yeah, it does freeze, unfortunately. For bigger greenhouse growers, you can trench. You trench and you put a pipe 8 feet below, and you connect maybe a pool or a small dugout inside the greenhouse from the dugout outside. But for me, I just use ice auger and put a hole on top of the ice and pump it from there. In winter, I just need to pump like 3 times in the whole winter, so it's not too bad.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Does anyone else have questions for Jianyi while we have him here?
Okay, thanks. And Jean-Philippe threw one up in the chat. I'm just wondering, you obviously researched this in terms of like cost effectiveness for, cheapest, most bang for your buck business, etc. If we're a bit more ecologically oriented, so we're willing to spend a bit more for ecological purposes did you source materials like with that in mind at all, or did you learn from that? I mean, is this available in a book somewhere where you can do some research that you would recommend?
In terms of the structure, I think this is pretty ecological. It's natural because the way I grow tomatoes, I don't give them artificial heating or lighting or CO2, so they just grow naturally. But if you like to spend more, I'd suggest maybe solar panels. And yeah, that's one thing that can give you more light and heat, especially in wintertime. And another thing you can do is vacuum solar tubes. So they are made of glass, and they're two layers of glass, and inside is a vacuum, and they can collect a lot of heat too. I know one guy in China. He just play with his ideas, right? So he installed so many, I think maybe 50 sets of very big sets of solar tubes inside the greenhouse, and in wintertime he can grow dragon fruit, very sweet dragon fruit, even though they get -15 in their location. But that solar tubes play a very important role, and it's cheap. It's free heat.
Jean-Philippe, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you left a comment in the chat box that goes a little bit beyond my understanding of greenhouses. So maybe if you want, do you want to explain your comment in the chat box, and maybe farmer to farmer, you and Jianyi can have a chat about it?
Yes, okay. Well, my question actually was also a suggestion, is for watering, as well as kind of giving more heat to the roots of your crops. One thing I'm experimenting is using an instant water heater that is inside the greenhouse, that you connect to the hydrant where the water is coming in the greenhouse, and you preheat just a little bit the water before it gets fed to the through drip irrigation to your crops, and it helps raise a little bit the temperature, and it's really good at, especially during transplanting, for the roots of your tomatoes to get established and things like this.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the suggestion. I use a similar instant water heater for my seedlings, but for my whole greenhouse, after I transplant them, it's pretty hard to heat so much water. But for my seedlings, I do use a water heater. Yeah, and so after I transplant all the seedlings, what I do is I only water it in the morning of a sunny day, so it's warm enough. And after the drip irrigation, the sunlight will heat the soil pretty quick, so the roots of the plants won't stay cool.
Thanks.
But thank you.
Jianyi, there's a question here in the chat box. So I'm gonna read it to you, and maybe you can provide some clarification. So in assembling the greenhouse kit, is it important to learn how to weld? What type of welder is required, and how much time does it need for a relatively able farmer to learn how to do this if they're going to do it on their own?
Okay, I just give you my own example. I knew nothing about welding. I was a geologist before I became a farmer. So I was not handy at all. But because I want to do this, so I went to a course. It was just like 4-hour course, so 1 hour a day, 4 days. And then I practiced a little bit myself. And then I went to weld my greenhouse. And it's just a very small, maybe like this big, MIG welder. It's not really professional, but it's portable, so I can put it on the bucket of my tractor to lift it up and to move it easily. And for amateur welder, a MIG welder is pretty easy because it's the gun is very short. You can get it really close and see clearly what you are doing and how well you are doing. So I think it's not very scary. Just be brave.
That's good advice. And your greenhouse is still standing, so the weld you're holding, and you did something right. So
yeah. My greenhouse, the outer structure is almost 3 years and still standing, and the biggest wind here has been 60 kilometers per hour. We had it for a couple of times during the past almost 3 years, and there was no damage.
Yeah, I think this is just such an amazing project that you've tackled, and that you did it all DIY yourself and your wife. it's just such an accomplishment. It's really great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, is there anyone else with questions before we call it a day here with Jianyi? Feel free to speak up or type your message into the chat box if you're feeling shy, but don't feel shy. It's a friendly bunch. Okay. I don't see anyone jumping to ask you any more questions, Jianyi, so I'm going to assume that we've covered everything. So thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy transplanting tomatoes right now, so
Yeah.
thanks for taking a little bit of time away to talk to all of us today here about your greenhouse.
Yeah,
And
you're welcome.
yeah, answering some of those top 10 questions that we've been getting since that webinar. So thank you so much. I will call it a day. I'm going to thank everyone that joined us for being here. Thank you for your questions too, because it helps educate everybody else that's going to watch this this video afterwards. So thank you for your contributions as well. And have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.
You
Yeah.
too, Marie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care, Jianyi. Happy planting.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Bye.